Professor Birch is kind of interesting, actually. Where Gen 1's Professor Oak was this stern old science patriarch with his grim expression and formal manner, and Professor Elm had the vibes of a younger and more cheerful, scatterbrained PhD student. Professor Birch, with his t-shirt, cargo shorts, and sandals, and practical bag slung over his shoulder, has much more the vibe of an enthusiastic field biologist for whom professorship is entirely a secondary thing to his main pastime of mapping the population densities of slime mold and bog leeches. Birch basically has much more the vibes of a fellow traveler than either Oak or Elm do. Someone who's having Pokemon adventures just as much as you are, just off-screen while you're going on your journey. Where Professor Oak is introduced to the player warning them not to go into the tall grass because wild Pokemon might attack you, Professor Birch is introduced running out of the tall grass because a wild Pokemon has attacked him. Oak is introduced speaking from experience, Birch is introduced having the experience. It makes Birch a distinctly different flavor of Pokemon professor, something much more relatable and much less distant than the previous professors kind of have been. He feels more like a friend or someone's chill older brother than a teacher or a lecturer. This, I think, is why he's designed also to look broad and chubby, both because it again increases the contrast with the flinty, rigid Professor Oak and the willowy, stick-thin Elm, but also because that kind of design is just classic chill-friendly dude design. The price of this is that Birch's design is unexceptional. It invests so much in making him just a regular dude that ultimately his design just isn't interesting or particularly special. It's nice, it's friendly, it's pleasant, but he also kind of looks like he would instantly vanish in literally any crowd of other Pokemon NPCs. And, like, maybe a character as important to the game as the Pokemon Professor ought to look a little bit more special than that. Roxanne is the first gym leader of Gen 3, and honestly, an interesting bit of character design. She's the leader of the Rock Gym, and Rock type intuitively is associated with burly, bulky, hard-muscled roughness and heavy weight. The character designs of characters like Bruno, the Hikers, and Brock, and so on. Roxanne, though, is a prim and proper put-together president of the student council type, dressed not in the earth tones and grays of the Rock type, but in dark navy blue and red, of all things. So her character design seems to entirely contradict the type that she represents, but this, of course, is the point. She's a Rock type trainer not because she physically reflects the Rock type, but because she mentally and socially does. She is the uncompromising honor student, hard as rock and flint, despite looking delicate. It's the kind of archetype you might expect to be represented by Steel or the Ice type, but here we both get a slight subversion of expectations, but also like, oh, right, no, that kind of makes sense, actually. Obviously, you could use the Rock type to represent this kind of character. So that's neat. The downside is that outside of that subversion, her design just isn't particularly interesting. Like, she does just kind of look like any prim and proper honor student character with very little to set her apart as exceptional. This is the necessary cost to achieve her little thematic subversion. It's a trade-off. The remakes, then, seem to try to address this issue, adding some much more exaggerated features to her design, especially her skirt. Her hair ribbons and tie are given much sharper, jagged shapes, and her primary clothes color is changed from navy to gray. Both of these moves seem calculated to make her conform more to her typing, to hew closer to the shape, language, and color of rocks. But her costuming is also changed away from the school uniform pattern towards something much more akin to a princess outfit. This all makes her more exceptional. It gives her design much more interesting shape language to work with and makes her look much more like both a gym leader and a rock-type trainer. And on that level, it is a huge improvement. But it does lose a lot of that subversion that made her interesting in the first place. Like, the school uniform and the navy blue color scheme was part of that, and in getting rid of those things, I do think something was lost. It was a trade-off in the other direction. What do you mean that's not his hair? You, that's not a hat. He wears a bandana and his hair is white and it just looks like that. Shut up! Brendan is the name of the male Gen 3 player character, and he happens to coincide with an interesting aesthetic shift in Pokemon's design sensibility. In the original Ruby and Sapphire artwork, he follows the template set by Red and Ethan in the previous generations, with thick covering fabrics making up the bulk of his outfit. It's shifting away from the traveling gear of the first two generations and towards something a little bit more like a tracksuit, but it still has that same late 90s sensibility going on in the costume design there. It's a little more cartoony than fashionable. Protagonists in games like these are usually designed to look cool, but also middle of the road enough that anyone could project themselves into being the one to inhabit the costume. And so, having the costume constitute most of the character design can sometimes be very helpful with that. Brendan does succeed in this, but I've also found his costuming to be some of the least interesting of all of the Pokemon protagonists. Like, he's kind of just wearing a tracksuit. But then comes that aesthetic shift I was talking about. Barely 2 years after Ruby and Sapphire, Emerald comes along, and Brendan gets a redesign to emphasize the green of Emerald in his character design, but also, wow, how things have changed in Pokemon. His costume shifts decisively out of the 90s mode and into a 2000s sporty athleisure style with much less bulk and a much sleeker shape language with more exposed skin and a noticeable shift in the size of his eyes relative to his head. This is Pokemon shifting into a character design aesthetic that would last through most of the DS era, and by the time of the remakes we can likewise see that the aesthetics of the 3DS era are making themselves known, because here he's even sleeker, even more streamlined, and has more of a focus on volume with a taller and lankier teenage anatomy and even bigger and even more expressive eyes. It's genuinely kind of fascinating to see these shifts in the series' sensibility play out so clearly across a single character design being iterated upon, and it's especially interesting to see the things that don't change. Brendan's hair, apparently his hat is a bright shock of white against his otherwise fairly dark costumes, and where every other part of his costuming shifts radically in shape and pattern over the generations, the hat remains consistent, inarguably the design feature that changes least in 10 years of iteration. And that, Ubisoft, is how you know that a hat is genuinely iconic. Brawly is the second gym leader of Gen 3, and he continues the trend of designs that go for casual subtlety in the early generations, being changed to fit a much more cartoonish vibe in the remakes. He's a fighting gym leader, which you sort of can't really tell from his costume. He's really just wearing an orange t-shirt over a slightly longer sleeved black shirt with cropped pants and sneakers and a slightly wild hairstyle. It's very understated, but the tight black shirt leaving his forearms exposed and the short pants do give him the air of someone who's concerned with freedom of movement. And he has the physique not of a Bruno or a Chuck kind of character, but a rock climber or a free runner, someone who actively engages with their body. His wild hair pushes the vibe a little bit towards the scrappy and the combative, but his association with the fighting type is really all vibes. There aren't any explicit indicators or obvious signs to tell you what his deal is. He just comes across as having the air of the kind of guy who probably has a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or Taekwondo or something, but who doesn't make it his whole personality. The final bit of the work is done by his sprite, where he has this wide, ready stance that kind of makes you go, oh, that looks like grappling or wrestling or some kind of fighting. Okay, I get it now. And in the Black and White 2 battle sprite, it gets even more explicit with him settling into a clear martial arts pose. Now, your mileage may vary on whether or not you like this vague, ambiguous vibe stuff, and certainly in a children's game, you can argue that this kind of subtlety won't communicate to the target audience properly. That's certainly how the remakes seem to feel about him, because they do their damnedest to take all of the ambiguity out of him, giving him battle gloves and barefoot toe shoes as though to shout from the rooftops, punches and kicks, this guy does punches and kicks, and replacing his casual double t-shirt outfit with a tight athletic shirt with a stylized fist design on the chest. And, I can't argue with it, he definitely looks a lot more like a fighting type gym leader now. This is not at all bad design, especially given the target audience of the games, but I don't know. I kind of like the idea of gym leaders that don't make being a gym leader their entire personality, and this is something that Gen 3 deliberately seems to aim for in its design language. The feeling that these are people with reasonably normal lives who are doing the gym leader thing for a hobby, but not as a life-consuming obsession that turns them into cartoon characters. Maybe I could write a longer video essay about that idea. May is the female playable character of Gen 3, and much like with Brendan, she presents a fascinating opportunity to chart the series' changing design aesthetic by comparing her design across the original, Emerald, and the remakes. The limbs, especially the legs of Ken Sugimori's early designs, for example, were often on the stockier side. Perhaps this is a result of having to squash his designs into tiny Game Boy sprites, but whatever the reason, you can see that the legs of both Brendan and May slim down to basically half of their original size as the generations go on, as well as generally lengthening their proportions across the board. This does change the physical vibes of both characters quite a bit. The bulkier legs and more bottom-heavy designs naturally feel a little bit more grounded and a little bit more physically powerful, while the longer, lankier designs feel more like they're aiming for a light-footed acrobatic athleticism. May's original design mirrors Brendan's color scheme, but where he's wearing a loose tracksuit, she's dressed in a tight jacket and jogging shorts, which creates a pretty effective contrast between their costuming. It's designed to help them work also as rivals, a kind of opposite. In Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, May's outfit is very much grounded in athletic wear, with the bandana to hold her hair down and those somewhat chunky-looking gloves for throwing and catching Pokeballs. This all contributes to a vibe of this is someone who is dressed to do a specific athletic activity, like someone who's going jogging. In this case, the activity is Pokemon catching, but the point is, this looks less like fashion and more like this is part of her toolkit as a trainer. The remakes switch that vibe up a lot, though, replacing her bandana with a front-facing bow, removing the gloves, and replacing her track jacket with a halter top. She keeps the compression shorts and sneakers, but the vibe here is much less one of doing specialized athletic activities and more one of general social fashionability. And honestly, I think the remakes kind of lose something in that transition. The original design for May feels like the kind of intensely athletic-minded competitive person who's ready to hike for weeks and track her Pokemon catching metrics every hour, whereas the remake version feels decidedly more casual about it. Her outfit is definitely cuter, and I do really like the kind of X-shape her front-facing bow creates with her bangs on her head. That's very visually appealing, but the remake design just doesn't quite feel like it's the same person anymore. How do you make a gym leader feel electric in their design? Well, it's elementary. Wattson is the third gym leader of Gen 3, and his electric typing comes through first and foremost in the simple expedience of he has a lightning bolt patch on his jacket. Can't really be any more obvious than that. Besides that, though, he also has a lot of yellow in his color scheme, which points in the electric direction, and then there's his spiky beard and that bright spike of white hair on his head, also pointing towards electric typing. And finally, he's cheerful, boisterous, and pretty much always laughing out loud. He is literally energetic. This is simple, solid design. A color scheme, a bit of iconography, and a well-chosen vibe, and boom, there you've got an electric gym leader. Now, in the remakes, he's not changed that much, except that he just seems to live in a different climate, I guess. His jacket is replaced with an electric-themed Hawaiian shirt, and his shoes with yellow sandals that have a peculiar screw-like clasp on them, I guess to evoke the design of Magnemite, probably. And honestly, while the remake changes aren't bad at all, they do nothing bad to his design, they do feel a bit unnecessary. Wattson embodied his purpose pretty much perfectly from the first go around, and I don't 100% know what the shirt and sandals are supposed to add to that. An increased sense of whimsy, I guess, which, okay, sure, I mean, I guess the designer was told that they had to change something, but Wattson was pretty much perfect just the way he was. In most Pokemon games, the player character doesn't have a father, or at least if there is a father, we don't get to see or interact with them. Thus, Mom, and usually a nameless Mom, becomes the only parent character to the player, and her main role is usually just to send us off on our adventure and stay at home waiting for us. So, Mom is usually not a particularly important or major character in any given narrative, but even bearing all of that in mind, the Gen 3 Mom might be the most boring and the most nondescript of all the moms in the franchise. There's no concept art of her that I can find, which means that she only really exists in the original games as a basic overworld sprite with no particularly distinguishing features, while in the remakes, she mostly just looks like she could be a generic NPC in any Pokemon game. Gen 2's Mom character had a lot of quirky vibes in her concept art, and later Mother characters, while never becoming too interesting to be left behind at home, all do look like they have distinct individual personalities and lead distinct individual lives. And perhaps there's a point to this in that Gen 3's Mom is married to Norman, the normal guy, normal leader of the normal gym for normies, and maybe to match him you need Norma, normal woman, normal housewife of the normal home for normies, but I still feel like the parent of kids who dress like Brendan and May do ought to have a little bit more of a personal style about her. Flannery is the fourth Gen 3 gym leader and the second ever fire-type gym leader. The first one was Blaine, who was a bit of an odd mad scientist kind of character, and by comparison, Flannery takes things a lot more back to basics. Which is to say that she has bright red hair, and she has arranged that hair in a ponytail that makes it look like the flower of an explosion or sparks flying everywhere. And just in case you still don't get it, she also has a flame symbol on her shirt. Outside of that, though, she mostly just kind of looks like a contemporary 2000s fashionable teenager with bell-bottom jeans and a crop top, and within the game's narrative, that is also exactly what she is, a young rookie gym leader who's still a little bit of a hothead. And in that sense, her simple design does work for her, I suppose. She's a gym leader who hasn't really picked out a costume and a gimmick yet, so she just kind of looks a bit normal. Still, given that her gym also doubles as the village hot springs, and she's sort of implied to have taken over running the hot springs as well as the gym, I don't know, maybe a little bit more could have been done with that in her character design. This seems to be the thought process also behind her redesign in the remakes, where her simple crop top is replaced by a fiery tube top and a tied-off t-shirt, and instead of a belt, she now wears either a scarf or maybe a towel wrapped around her waist by the pants. And these things undeniably give her much more of a hot springs or beach-ish vibe, so honestly, yeah, that's a pretty solid win for the remakes on the design front. A very small change that produces a little bit more character storytelling. Wally is a rival character, technically. Really more of a friend, honestly, but I've always sort of felt like he was kind of a third protagonist character for the generation. Like, if May is red and Brendan is blue, then Wally is the Gen 3 version of green. Quite literally green, actually, with his color scheme. And to an extent, the game treats him a little bit like that, where we, as the player character, are always necessarily a cipher, silent and unexpressive so as not to get in the way of the player's own story. Wally gets to have much more of a classic kids media protagonist character arc. He's a weak, sickly, and somewhat insecure boy who, through his journey with Pokemon TM, learns to be more confident and improve his health and become stronger and more realized as a person and grow up a little bit. This is the aspirational image of Pokemon as not merely entertainment, but a source of healthy life lessons for children all across the world. And, I mean, Wally is a nice kid and I don't mind his character, but it's hard not to see the corporate brand management at work in his narrative role. Anyway, as a character design, he's very deliberately simple. Just a kid in a shirt and pants with a little bit of bedhead going on. The collared shirt with button sleeves is oddly adult for a kid of his age, or rather, it gives a little bit of a vibe of a kid whose mother picks out his clothes for him and likes for him to look like a polite and well-groomed young man. It makes him look a little bit sheltered. But then there's that messy hair, a little bit all over the place, that contrasts the well-mannered, polite fashion that he's stuck with and gives him some of that childishness back. It's simple design, but it works, and the primary white in his color scheme does gesture a little bit at the idea of frailty and innocence, and it's completely devoid of the sporty, outdoorsy gear aesthetic that Brendan and May are running around with. In the remakes, though, he's quite different. Now, he has a practical shoulder bag, and over his collared shirt, now he wears an adorable cardigan decorated with what looks like knitted patterns. It's the coat of a kid whose mom has told him to be sure not to catch a cold out there, and the sleeves are, notably, a little bit too long for him, emphasizing his slight and undersized body. His hair remains messy to make him childish, but he has lost that pure white primary color scheme, and the green is missing from his pants as well, making his remake color scheme a lot less interesting to me. I think Wally benefited from being a very simple design, and the remake has over-decorated him a little bit, maybe in a bid to make him stand out more, but the point of Wally is that he is, at the start of his journey at least, a bit weak, a bit meek, and kind of unremarkable. Unlike Brendan and May, who are dedicated Pokemon lifers, Wally is supposed to at least start out as more of a generic everyman, or every child in this case. And so I think I'd like it better if his design got more complicated and added more detail bit by bit as he collected his badges. I think that would do much better storytelling for the kind of narrative he's supposed to represent. Norman is the 5th gym leader of Gen 3, and he's also your dad. As I've noted before, this is a little bit unusual. Pokemon protagonists usually only have moms, whose role is to send you off on your journey and then wait patiently for you to come back home in stereotypical mom fashion. Stereotypical dad figures, on the other hand, in stories, are usually sources of discipline and challenge, more emotionally distant, and sometimes a barrier to overcome on the journey to self-realization. And certainly that's also how Norman is presented, refusing to battle his own child until they have proven themselves by earning badges elsewhere. Thus, he's sort of a judge of your progress, who faces you at the halfway point to make sure that you're ready for the back half and the most difficult part of your quest. And that works well enough, I guess, although there's always been something a little bit awkward about the protagonist's dad being a gym leader and yet being so uninvolved in their child's journey to learn to, train Pokemon. Like, it almost feels a bit neglectful, to be honest. And if Pokemon was a more narrative-focused franchise, that could have been an interesting narrative beat, like maybe our player character is becoming a trainer to try and get closer to their father. But Pokemon protagonists just don't really get to have that level of interiority or personality. It gets in the way of the player self-identifying with their character, and Pokemon is, first and foremost, your personal power fantasy. Anyway, as a design, Norman is well, he's a normal type gym leader, and with Gen 3 already having a fairly down-to-earth sensibility for the gym leader character designs, he's kind of just a guy in a tracksuit visually. With his high widow's peak and hair combed forward, there's definitely something a little bit approaching middle age about him, which gives him a little bit of character, but not really that much. There's very little to him visually. The remakes try to address this by shortening and opening up the jacket, rolling up the sleeves, and giving him the most dad-coded footwear in the world, which is sandals. And that does help. The outfit is better and more interesting without being too flashy, but I think his artwork now makes him look entirely too young in the face to pass for anyone's father. His hairline has been brought down too much, he doesn't look like he's on the cusp of balding anymore, and his jaw is just way too small for the age he's supposed to be. The concept artwork manages to still make him look father-like, I guess, but the final sprite of the character just doesn't work. He ends up looking way too young. Gabby and Ty are recurring NPCs in Gen 3. They are a reporter and her cameraman whom the player periodically runs into and who will battle you and make you engage with the game's EC chat system gimmick, which is a series of pre-generated phrases that the player can string together and use in multiplayer communications. Their secondary function is to do a little bit of Pokemon world building and flatter the player's ego. In this world, random Pokemon battles on Route Bumfuck in the middle of nowhere are television material, primetime stuff, and you, the player, oh my god, you are so good at battling. Wow, dazzling. Everyone wants to interview you because you are famous for being so good at battling. Pokemon is founded first and foremost on being a power fantasy, and Gabby and Ty are among many NPCs in the franchise who exist to support that. As designs, they are a classic double act, the pretty and put-together television presenter and her schlubbier cameraman backing her up. In the original games, we only have their sprites to go by, where they have a little bit of a red-blue contrast going on between Gabby's blue hair and Ty's red cap, and Gabby is rocking a foot-short haircut and sleeveless dress vest and shirt over jeans outfit, which looks kind of interesting. In the remakes, though, Gabby instead has brown hair, arranged neatly in a professional bob, while wearing a vest and top arrangement over short white pants and stylish slip-ons. Meanwhile, Ty rocks some slightly ratty jeans and a graphic tee with a bit of stubble on his chin and a backwards cap over long, unkempt hair. There's really not that much to them. They're not exciting or interesting as character designs, but they are effective as character designs. You can tell what the dynamic is here just at a glance. The curious thing, though, is that Gabby and Ty have appeared in both the Pokemon Generations anime, been referenced in the main anime when Jessie and James dress up as them for an episode on the X and Y season, and they seem to play a genuinely major supporting role in the Pokemon Adventures manga, which, that's a lot more appearances than you would usually expect for a couple of disposable NPCs that were only created to introduce a gameplay gimmick. I guess someone at Game Freak just grew fond of them. Winona is the 6th gym leader of Gen 3 and an interesting take on a flying-type gym leader. In the otherwise fairly down-to-earth sensibility of Gen 3, she also stands almost alone as a gym leader who has any kind of over-the-top costume. She's dressed in a flight suit and a somewhat old-timey pilot's hat with goggles, and 2 tufts of her hair emerge from under the hat, taking on the shape of wings on her head. There's an interesting silhouette here, bulky and broad around the legs and arms with the big suit, but narrowing around her torso to give her very exaggerated hips, giving her a slightly odd-looking body shape. Her original sprite also presents her with closed eyes, head inclined up, almost as though she's feeling a breeze rushing in around her. All of this, then, makes perfect sense with her original dialogue, which focuses on soaring and flying as thematic touchpoints for her. But that changes in later generations and remakes, where she shifts from flying and soaring to an obsession with elegant choreography and grace, which is a change in priority that is also reflected in her design. Her Black and White 2 battle sprite has her taking a dancer's pose at the start of the battle, and in the remakes, her flight suit has been streamlined a lot, with winglets added to make her sleeves and legs, and the whole thing framed much more like a dancer's costume rather than a flight suit with a slightly opened back and wing designs over the shoulders. Again, this is the remakes perhaps overcomplicating a perfectly functional Gen 3 design, but honestly, it's also just kind of retconning her character a lot. Not that she has a lot of character to retcon, she's an early generation Pokemon NPC, but it's a slightly weird thing to do. Winona was never about elegance and grace and dancing originally. Her thing was about flying and soaring and escaping gravity. That's why she wore a pilot suit, and that all worked. The change in direction into dancing and elegance and grace feels weirdly unmotivated. Like, I can't think of a sensible reason to do this, and so it ends up feeling like the only reason they did it is because, I guess, being a pilot wasn't feminine enough? I don't know, man. It's a weird decision. Hey, sorry to interrupt the compilation, and I'll let you get back to it in just a moment. I just need to take an obligatory segment here to thank my channel members for helping to pay my rent, and let you know that if you want early access to all the things that get uploaded to this channel, you can become a channel member as well, and those memberships start at $1 a month. There's usually about a week or two worth of shorts in early access just waiting to be published, so if you're impatient and you want to help me pay my editor Minimo, who's responsible for most of the visuals you are seeing, that is an option. However, I'm also doing just fine these days, and if you want to put your money somewhere where it'll do some more good, please consider donating to Doctors Without Borders or the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund. Even a few dollars can make a big difference in their hands. Anyway, that's all I needed to say. Thank you for sitting through it, and I'll let you get back to what you actually came here to see. Tate and Liza are the 7th gym leaders of Gen 3, and a surprisingly late-game execution of Gen 3's brand new double battle gimmick. Like, you would think that they would put that kind of thing in the 2nd gym or something just to show it off. They are twins, and are playing on the common pop culture myths about twins having special psychic bonds and connections with one another, and that's a reasonably solid place to start from. On top of that, they use the aesthetics of martial arts in their posing and their costumes, wearing something that looks equal parts like the robes of a novice monk and the uniform of a young martial artist. It feels Chinese in influence to me, or possibly Korean. People in the comments who know more about this kind of thing, please sound off with your opinions. But given that Gen 3 is also the generation that introduces Meditite and Medicham, which begins to treat the fighting and psychic types as complementary and connected rather than as strict opposites, it's cool to see a gym leader design also start to blur those lines. They don't ever have Meditite or Medicham on their teams. They use Soul Rock and Lunatone because double battle gimmick, but, you know, still. Like many identical twin character pairs, Tate and Liza are designed to look almost identical, and the usual way that you create interest in such a design pair is to create a few key points of contrasting difference, usually differences that say something about their personalities or their relationship to one another. With Tate and Liza, unfortunately, the only real difference between them in Gen 3 is that Liza is girl and therefore longer hair and eyelashes, which is functional design, I guess, but pretty boring as character design goes. The remakes try a little bit harder by giving them unique secondary colors in the stars on their uniform and mirroring the shape of how they close their uniforms across their chest, which, along with a higher contrast blue and black color scheme, creates better visual interest than the powder blue identical robes that they wear in the original. Still though, I feel like something more interesting could have been done with the idea of psychic martial arts twins than just this. Team Aqua are the antagonists of Pokemon Sapphire, and they are a group of, I guess, eco-terrorists who want to use the power of Kyogre to do a biblical flood to the world, to cleanse it and bring back a state of nature where Pokemon can flourish. That's kind of a lot, and so of course, naturally, they are designed to look like pirates. The Gen 3 games are, as we've talked about, fairly restrained in their human character designs, and so the original Team Aqua grunts take the form of basically people in striped shirts and blue pants with some white circle designs down the side and bandanas on their head with a skull and crossbone-esque design, which I think is supposed to evoke Kyogre. Where Team Rocket's grunts derived their menace in the original games by wearing something that almost looked like Nazi uniforms, Team Aqua, by contrast, just sort of look like people in very half-hearted pirate cosplay. Outside of a pirate's love for the sea, there's really nothing in their designs that reflect their ideology or their rather genocidal plans. It feels like the design process at Game Freak for these guys started and ended with, we need some kind of ocean-themed bad guy, and someone in the room said pirates, and then nobody bothered to think any harder about it. The remakes, then, are stuck with that limitation, but they do at least dial up the effort a little bit in the costuming, adding sashes and stripy leggings and ragged piratical short trousers, and generally dialing up the cartoon bad guy vibes. It does make them a more effective contrast with Team Magma's more regimented uniformed look, so that is an improvement at least, but yeah, Team Aqua just aren't designed very well. They are an apocalyptic anarcho-primitivist doomsday cult, but they dress like millennials on Talk Like a Pirate Day. Team Magma are your antagonists in Pokemon Ruby, being a group of fanatical human supremacists who want to use Groudon to dry up the oceans and expand the land so humans can have more places to live and do science and innovate and stuff. There's some Malthusianism to this, almost a gesture towards the peril of resource scarcity, and if you want to really stretch the interpretation, it sounds a bit like an early 20th century German political concept which is commonly called Lebensraum. My point is that in much the same way that Team Aqua as villains are an apocalyptic eco-terrorist doomsday cult, Team Magma's ridiculous cartoon villain plot is one of those things that becomes really dark the moment you think about it even a little bit beyond the surface. So, how does any of that translate into their character designs? Well, Mostly it doesn't. In the original game, with its fairly restrained character design style, they just look kind of like people in weird hoodies. They've got a black and red color scheme sort of communicating the idea of lava and magma, and they have a mountain-shaped sigil on their shirts, and their hoods, interestingly, seem to be kind of designed to look like Groudon's head, which, okay, I guess. But like, these are supposed to be human supremacists, so why dress them up like a Pokemon? And more to the point, why not dress up Team Aqua to look a lot more like Kyogre? Neither team's character design really seems to try very hard at all to tell their story. The remakes do something more interesting with Team Magma, putting them in something less like hoodies and sweatpants and much more like uniforms. And in fact, the key art for the team in the remakes shows them all lined up in regimented perfect lines and doing a 45-degree ankle salute with their arms, which... jetzt verstehen Sie, warum ich vorhin Lebensraum erwähnt habe. Oi. The ribbed undersuit of their uniforms now does do a much better job of evoking the idea of magma or lava, and they are now strict regimentation definitely does a better job of setting them up as the order and discipline faction against Aqua's piratical anarchy. Strict shirt civilization versus wild chaotic nature. I guess that works. They are more interesting than Aqua's basic pirate costumes, so they win that contest, but still, they just really don't do a good job of expressing their team's ideals or their wants or their plans or the narrative that they're supposed to play a part in. Wallace is the final gym leader of Gen 3 and graduates to Champion in Pokémon Emerald. Now, as we've discussed before, Gen 3 has kind of a downplayed design aesthetic for its humans especially. It doesn't really take a lot of big swings, certainly not compared to later generations, and while some gym leader designs benefit from this level of restraint, Wallace is not one of them. He's an artist, a master of illusions, crafted with the elegance of water Pokémon. He's flamboyant, he's creative, he's eccentric, he's a guy in a collared shirt and corduroys. Wallace has slightly silly hair and his oversized beret, because, you know, artists have berets, but beyond that, he is... let's be honest, he's just fucking boring. When he becomes Pokemon Champion, at least they add a big cape to his design, which helps a little bit, but the base outfit underneath remains snooze-inducingly basic. So, the remakes to the rescue. The added complexity that the remakes introduced to Gen 3 character designs don't always work for the characters, but oh my god, Wallace needed this very, very badly. Now, his outfit is a tiny purple sleeveless crop top, a big translucent winged scarf, a frilly half cape, rows of bracelets on his arms, and a pair of low-slung overalls with hip windows that reveal that Wallace is either going commando or wearing the world's tiniest jockstrap underneath that outfit. It's a massive improvement. It gives him some flair and some personal style and makes him a personality, someone who looks like they like to perform and be remembered for their aesthetic. Now, I could quibble a bit about whether he's really giving water-based illusionist, and I think his color scheme could do with a little bit more contrast, but that's nitpicking, really. The remakes finally make a real gym leader character design out of this man. Matt and Shelly are the Team Aqua admins, secondary antagonists that serve as mini-bosses as you battle your way towards the confrontation with the big boss, Archie. And in the original Ruby and Sapphire, mini-bosses is really all that they are. They are a shirtless pirate dude and a red-headed pirate lady, minimally incremental upgrades over the regular Team Aqua grunts, and there's really not that much discernible personality between them. Shelly is design-wise perhaps the most interesting of the two back then, as her big curly red hair is the kind of design feature that implies passion, temper, and anger, albeit none of that matters to her characterization at all in the game because she doesn't really have any. The Aqua admins in the original game are disposable, boring NPCs and not worth remembering. The remakes improve on this a lot, turning the two of them into actual characters who have an actual relationship with their boss and with his dream of an apocalyptic world-resetting flood. Matt is now an enormous muscle hunk, wearing what sort of looks like a ripped diving suit, almost like it was too small to contain his fervor and his muscles. He has the Team Aqua symbol painted or tattooed across his chest, and a sort of shark tooth motif of blue tattoos around the perimeter of his face. He is, very obviously, the Bruiser, the big, loud, passionate Team Tank, but he's dedicated less to Team Aqua's mission and more to Archie personally. To quote him directly, "I love interesting, strong dudes, that's why I love my bro Archie, and I have only one hope, for my bro Archie to finish what he set out to do. That's all, my bro Archie is everything to me, I live to serve my bro." Now, I'm sure there's a heterosexual explanation for that somewhere, but the point is that he is motivated by passion and feelings, and not so much by the team's mission. He is a feeling character, not a thinking or a scheming one, and his big himbo muscle man design is a classic way to code for that. This also makes him a strong contrast with Shelly, who has changed from a fiery redhead to having black hair now. Her diving suit is intact where his is shredded, she is fashionable where he is rough, slim where he is large, and so on and so on. They make for a double act. Her hair's ragged silhouette still gives her a hint of wildness, but she's clearly the more together of the two of them. And Shelly is also the one who's more dedicated to Team Aqua's mission, conscious of their quest for a perfect world and what all of that would mean. Now, Matt and Shelly aren't amazing characters. They are Saturday morning cartoon archetypes, but they demonstrate how much even a bit of basic character design craft can elevate and enrich a story, because the remake makes them so much more memorable and personable and interesting that the original story frankly feels a lot lesser without them. Juan replaces Wallace as the 8th gym leader in Pokemon Emerald, what with Wallace being Pokemon champion in that game, and honestly, he's just straight up a better character design than Wallace is. That's a low bar. Of course, Wallace's original design is quite boring, but Juan has a clear concept and communicates it effectively. He's outlandish enough to be memorable, but not so outlandish as to be totally unbelievable. His design plays in the space of the upper-class dandy, with his fuzzy little mustache and cravat and high-collared open coat, as well as the frilled sleeves reaching up over his hands, and that immaculately arranged slick-back black hair with silver streaks arranged just so. Still, Gen 3 is and remains the most grounded and unextravagant generation for human character designs, and so underneath his coat, his outfit gets a lot more basic. It looks like a black vest and purple shorts, of all things, which does give him a little bit the vibe of a cosplayer wearing normal clothes underneath a big fancy costume. So he doesn't exactly look like aristocratic old money when you look at him a bit closer. He loses a little bit of that dandy charm. And while his design is better than Wallace, it still suffers from that same Gen 3 lack of sauce. Tabitha and Courtney are the Team Magma admins, and much like their counterparts on Team Aqua, in the original games they are little more than barely upgraded grunts, distinguished mostly by their propensity for laughing in basically every line of dialogue. Their outfits are a little bit more dramatic than the usual grunts and do look more interesting, but ultimately they are distinctly unmemorable as characters. They are mini-bosses at best. In the remakes, at least as designs, they do get a lot better, developing distinct physical and personality features to set them apart as something approaching actual characters, although, frankly, they lose out to Matt and Shelly over on Team Aqua in that department because neither of them are especially interesting. Tabitha retains the habit of constantly laughing, being characterized mostly as a rather annoying, arrogant, mean boy, while Courtney instead gets a strangely robotic speech pattern and obsessive personality, which eventually explodes into a angry tantrum attempt to basically end the world, and then later becomes a sobbing, crying fit when Maxie apologizes to her. It's all a little bit, well, the average Pokemon character is rarely more than their surface tropes and archetypes, and Tabitha and Courtney are decidedly average Pokemon characters. As designs, there's really not that much to them. Tabitha is just a fat guy in a coat and boots, an outfit which seems to express very little specific about him as a person, especially compared to his counterpart Matt, and Courtney, despite being a seemingly emotionless weird introvert, is dressed in a much cuter outfit with dress-like coat extensions on her hips and go-go boots on her feet. I guess the idea here is that it's supposed to be Gap-moe of a sort. It's supposed to be cute because it seems to contradict her dead fish personality. Well, that could be interesting, I guess, but it just isn't really an explored theme within the game. The best I can say about Courtney and Tabitha is that they sort of embody two halves of Maxie's whole. Tabitha, his cackling, self-obsessed arrogance, and Courtney, his cold-hearted, calculating obsession with science and data, but their designs just don't really meaningfully relate to either Maxie or to their own personalities in any kind of compelling way. The remake versions are definitely by far better characters than the originals, but let's be real, that's a low bar to clear. Sidney is the first of the Elite Four of Gen 3 and a Dark-type trainer to boot. Commensurately, he's supposed to look like somewhat of an unsavory sort, a little bit of a dark personality. His tiny little mohawk and bald head, along with a popped collar and open neck in the open games, though, is more or less the extent of how far his menace goes, and it doesn't really work. Gen 3 has that restrained character design style we've talked about, and Sidney rather suffers from it. He doesn't especially look like a dark-type person, he looks like a bartender or a close-up magician with a really annoying TikTok page. The posing of his sprite sort of gives him a little bit of guy playing craps on the side of the road energy, but yeah, there's really barely anything to him in the original. This guy could be fire or psychic type just as easily as he could be dark. The remakes do a lot to fix this, however, putting him in what I think is meant to be sort of Yakuza-inspired fashion, a suit jacket and corduroys and bright colors with a gold watch on his wrist. His posing and attitude is also a lot stronger here, with much more of a crooked grin guy who's looking for a fight attitude. His tiny little mohawk is now curved sharply back over his head, and he takes a much more asymmetric, confident, and confrontational physical attitude, even in his overworld model. And that finally manages to invest him with some of that, hey, you're looking at me kind of energy that is appropriate to a dark type. While Sidney is not exactly deep or a meaningfully active character in the narrative of the game, the remake design at least does successfully manage to make him feel like he actually has a personality. Archie is the leader of Team Aqua, and he is a radical eco-terrorist whose explicit plan is to drown or displace millions of people across global coastlines in order to return the world to an imagined pre-Lapsarian state of supposed natural purity. Not that the games ever take him quite that seriously. Archie is a Saturday morning cartoon villain. His transgressions are never actually more serious than what can be repented for with an honest, I'm sorry and I won't do it again. In the original games, he is, well, he feels on the Giovanni side of things in terms of design, being literally just a guy in an all-black suit with a Team Aqua bandana on his head and a chain not so much around his neck in the artwork as it seems to be hanging around his clavicle. Combined with his facial hair and sharp eyes, I think the idea is to give off a vibe of like crime guy, basically a mobster-esque sort of figure, which, I mean, okay, pirates, mobsters, I guess there is an overlap between those archetypes, but visually he's just not very interesting at all. The remakes seem to want to compensate for this, albeit maybe they compensate a little bit too much, setting him up with a high-collared wetsuit, which is an odd thing, I'm not sure why that would exist, a ship's anchor around his neck, an anchor chain for a belt, and a whalebone half-skirt. It's a design that very much yells, yeah, do you get it? It's because he's a pirate, and he's on the ocean. Do you get it? Is it obvious? And yeah, fair enough, as a primary villain, he does have to embody the side that he's on, but I do think that it's missing a sense of his connection to nature and his ideals of returning to an unspoiled world. All of his imagery relates to ships, which are human things, or to fishing, which is sort of the opposite of humans not meddling with nature. I wish he had more animal imagery to him, or even ocean plant life, rather than being stuck with all this rubber and metal. Still, the remake is a vast improvement as a character design. The original barely looked like it had a personality, let alone a possibly benevolent one, but the louder, bolder, and more cartoony look in the remakes do give him a lot more room to maneuver between hero and villain. Phoebe is the second Elite Four member of Gen 3 and a very interesting fit for a Ghost-type trainer. She takes the form of what I think is supposed to be a Hawaiian or at the very least Pacific Islander-inspired dancer, or maybe possibly Okinawan, with a pair of giant flowers in her hair and a long flowing blue skirt to emphasize the dancing part. The long skirt and giant flowers in her hair make an oddly good pairing with ghost types. There is something ceremonial about the flowers, something decidedly non-casual, and cultures all around the world have millennia of cultural connection between the motions of dance and the summoning, calming, or communion with spirits of the afterlife. The smooth, flowing motion of a dancer with a long skirt? Yeah, intuitively, that does feel concordant with the idea of ghosts and spirits. There is a connection there. Meanwhile, she's also an interesting contrast with her typing. Dancing is also associated with life, with vitality, with the physical reality of the now, and she is young, where ghosts and spirits have much more of a tendency to be associated with old age and death and stillness. Phoebe may also be the character in Gen 3 who was least changed in the remakes, being functionally indistinguishable except for the change in art style, and honestly, I don't disagree with that. There really wasn't anything meaningful to improve here. Maxie is the boss of Team Magma, and especially in Omega Ruby, is a radical human supremacist obsessed with expanding the available living space for people by awakening Groudon to make new landmasses. Ecological consequences be damned. Millions of ocean Pokémon must die. Much like Archie, though, he is not actually any more evil than what can be resolved with a I have seen the error of my ways and I am sorry at the end of the game. In the original game, where Archie has a sort of Diet Giovanni mobster vibe to his design, Maxie is pushing more towards an evil scientist archetype, wearing something almost like a lab coat, nice and neat with his hair slicked down. It's a very typical early 2000s tech villain sort of vibe, basically. Change his colors to all black and he would look right at home in a Matrix movie. Anyway, the idea seems to be that Archie is a criminal underworld sort of villain, while Maxie is an industrial overlord type of villain. And the contrast works between them well enough. Maxie looks haughty, put together, and intellectually minded, which is all he really needs to be for the cartoon villain role that he's playing in the original game. In the remakes, meanwhile, Maxie loses his weird widow's peak in favor of a side part, his coat opens up, and he wears the distinctive Team Magma ribbed bodysuit underneath it all, pushing him from techie into something that's more along the lines of cheesy B-movie sci-fi, almost, especially with his shiny rubber boots. And just to make absolutely sure that you know that this man is a thinky, intellectual, nerdy brain boy, they slap him in a pair of slightly over-designed, safety-looking glasses. Now, personally, I can't help but find his knee-length shorts a little bit silly. That feels sort of boyish, or maybe perhaps rather dad-like, in a way that kind of undercuts any sense of real menace that might come from the man. His posture is upright and regal, but even with his coat, the shorts and wellies keep making him look a little bit like he's a science teacher taking his class on a field trip. He does avoid becoming quite so overly cartoony as Archie is, and certainly the more restrained aesthetic helps the contrast between Magma as the strict, regimented, orderly thinking man's team, and chaotic Aqua, which is all about heart, passion, and individuality. Personally, I think especially his original coat is a better fit for his character. The new open coat with that low collar, and again, especially the shorts, just don't really feel like the fashion of an uptight ideologue. But on the other hand, the silly glasses he's got now add a lot more character to the man, to the point that the original just kinda looks naked without them. So, all in all, I guess he's kind of a side grade. Glacia is the third Elite Four member of Gen 3, and she is an ice specialist. As a design, she's a bit interesting because the trainer that she most immediately resembles to me is Agatha from Gen 1. In fact, she kind of straight up just looks like a slightly younger version of her. Now, to my knowledge, there is literally no connection between them, it's just a curious little overlap in aesthetic. Insofar as Glacia represents her ice type, the idea seems to be one of class. She is a proper upper-class capital L lady, and hence her ice type represents the chilly politeness of that archetype, which, I mean, okay, sure, I guess that's functional. And she does have that spiky collar around her neck and curious nicked hair strands evoking a little bit of the sharp shape language of ice crystals. Like much of Gen 3, though, I think she does suffer a bit from under-design. Some sharper shoes and heels, or a more geometric cut on her dress might have helped a little bit here, and if we really want to play with class signifiers, some more visual indications of wealth would also have supported the archetype. Which, oh hey, that's exactly what the remake version does. Here, her colors are made more pale and desaturated, which helps with the coldness a little bit. There's some sharp embroidery around the collar of her dress that calls ice to mind. She wears a jewel-studded choker, there's that wealth. Her dress is more geometric and stiffer, she has sharper shoes and heels, and she now wears gloves with more sharp edges to their sleeves. She also has much more noticeable makeup. Her hairstyle looks a little bit more coiffed, and just in general, she gives off a much stronger upper-class vibe than she did before. Her face has been rounded off a little, and with the smaller jaw and mouth and bigger eyes, it does also feel like she's been de-aged a little bit, which I mean, I think letting her be at least visibly middle-aged would support the archetype better, frankly. Curiously, her dress now also has a low cut around her collarbone, nearly, but not quite, giving her actual cleavage, which I don't think I entirely agree with. Her whole thing feels like it's supposed to be this sort of chilly, polite air of impenetrable social distance, and opening up her clothes and showing more skin to me feels contrary to that vibe. I also do feel like her dress could have done with a bit of embroidery or detail around the hem or something. Again, just as a signifier of expense and class, the dress does get rather plain once we go below the waist. Still, like most Elite Four members, Glacia is barely a character. Her only real function is to be a momentarily striking boss fight before you move on, and especially the remake version really does succeed at that. Drake is the final Elite Four member of Hoenn, and one of the few characters from Ruby and Sapphire who was not changed at all, not even a little bit, in the remakes. He is a grizzled old ship's captain, shirtless with visible ribs underneath a big black greatcoat with a blue lining, and he wears workman-like heavy trousers with a thick belt and laced-up boots. Now, it's an odd thing to have a huge coat and then no shirt, but combined with the torn and frayed edges on his coat, his visible ribs and sunken cheeks essentially give the impression of a shipwrecked sort of character, almost as though he lost his shirt and had to grab a ruined old coat just to stay warm. In the Pokemon Masters lore, we do learn that he was indeed a shipwrecked sailor who got saved at sea by a Dragonite and thus decided to turn his life to Pokemon training, and yeah, the design works for that. That's exactly the kind of story I kind of already assumed that he had just from looking at him. And that is generally the sign of a strong design, at least a strong design for Drake's purpose, which is to be the last and toughest boss before you fight the final champion. His main job, really, is to look striking and a little bit dangerous, and he achieves that with aplomb while adding just a hint that this guy has lived an interesting life and has some stories to tell. His big captain's hat, which casts a permanent shadow over his sharp eyes, and the huge collar on his greatcoat also have a little bit of a military bearing about them, rather than a civilian ship's captain, a commissar vibe if you're a 40k fan, which also helps to add to the sense of danger about him, like he's no ordinary opponent. So, yeah, I guess it is no surprise that Drake wasn't changed at all between the generations. There's really nothing to be gained from adding on or taking anything away from his design. It has exactly the features it needs to get its point across. Short of, I don't know, maybe adding some damage and wear to his pants and boots, I guess I literally cannot think of any way he could be improved. Steven Stone is the champion of Hoenn, a trust fund rich kid and an avid rock collector. He shows up sporadically throughout Ruby and Sapphire, mentoring the player character and helping out with crises, but never lets on that he's the champion until you finally face him. His design, though, does clue you in that he's not just your average geology nerd. He's got a fitted coat with purple zigzag patterns, rings on his fingers, and around his arms. In a generation whose design sensibility is generally as down-to-earth as Ruby and Sapphire's is, all of that, plus the bright red cravat and the side-swept ice blue hair, makes him stand out almost like a Yu-Gi-Oh! Protagonist. Curiously though, design-wise, especially the original Gen 3 Steven could also very easily be antagonist-coded. Ice blue hair, sharp eyes, the visual features of wealth and the upper class. Like, if he had turned out to be an evil team leader, I don't think I really would have been surprised. But no, Steven is pretty much just a nice guy the whole time. The remakes, as is their wont, dial everything about him up several degrees. His coat is more elaborate and now hangs open, allowing his cravat to be even larger in his design and revealing a vest with sharp little clasps. He has a megastone on the lapel pin, and then there is the design feature that's maybe a little bit too much. He has literal metal crowns on his coat sleeves, which I feel like is maybe spoiling the surprise that he's the champion just a little bit. Maybe that was a bit too much. The real knock against Steven, though, I feel, is that while his design does a great job signaling that he's important and comes from money, neither the original nor the remake do anything to show off that he's a rock nerd. This guy loves hanging out in caves and gets excited over cool stones. At the very least, I feel like he should have rough and calloused hands, or dirt stains on his knees, or he should wear sensible boots to contrast his otherwise business boy fancy fashion, or something. Part of Steven's character is that he is, literally, much more down to earth than his background and position would suggest, and I think his designs could stand to do a little something to support that. His personality and his hobbies should have an effect on how he looks, just as much as his background and job does. Ultimately, I've never really found Steven very memorable or interesting, and I think that lack of personality is a major reason why. Zinnia is the special bonus story character invented for the Delta episode of Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. In the story, she's a lore keeper of the Draconid people, a tribe of dragon trainers who keep the memory of Rayquaza and its mega evolution in their legends, and who plans to use Team Aqua and Magma's plans to awaken Kyogre and Groudon as a way to awaken Rayquaza as well so it can save the world from a falling meteor. As a design, she is what I sometimes and usually affectionately think of as a cosplay-ass design. which is to say that she's designed much more with the sensibility of wearing a cool costume than with the sensibility of wearing fashion. Her outfit is calculated to look striking and theatrical much more than it is practical or even expressive of any kind of personal aesthetic, which is of course not unusual for Pokémon. In later generations especially, it is in fact the norm, but when compared with the much more down-to-earth fashion sensibility of the original Gen 3 characters, yeah, she does end up looking a little bit like a Spot the main character meme. Who amongst these could be the enemy stand user? We may never know. She stands out a lot less compared to the remake designs, of course, but even there, her dramatic burned cape with scale shoulders and serpentine megastone adorned ankle bracelet puts her very much in the very special character category. Like, this girl doesn't look like she goes to school or runs a paper route, nor does it look like she has any kind of a life outside of being plot relevant. It's a matter of taste, of course, but especially given that Zinnia is supposed to be essentially an indigenous character, I guess, I kind of wish that her outfit was more about her culture than it is about making her look cool and intriguing. Who are the Draconic people? What's their fashion like? From the very, very few images we ever see of them in other Pokemon media, Zinnia dresses almost nothing like them and only really shares her cloak with her lore keeper predecessor. And that's a bit of a pity. Her design could be used to world build, to introduce a unique fashion aesthetic to Hoenn, but that's just not really the priority here. I will say, I do like that her hair is so jagged and wild, because that's the kind of detail that says that she has to cut her hair for herself because she's all on her own. Nobody's taking care of her, which jives with her general story of trying to save the world all by her lonesome and putting on a brave face even despite the hardship. As a character, Zinnia ultimately feels like a very special episode kind of character, much more than she feels like she's part of the world that she's trying to save. She is eminently cosplayable, but she also feels an essential bonus DLC.